We've seen a lot of really intimidating, mean-looking fighters in UFC history, but a question that always gets everyone talking is, who is the scariest fighter of all time? On his You're Welcome podcast, Chael Sonnen, aka the American Gangster, named Cain Velasquez as the scariest MMA fighter ever. And speaking of Cardio Cain, who are some of the most intimidating MMA fighters of all time? Stay tuned for all this and more. First up, he ticks all of the boxes. Chael Sonnen's podcasts are always entertaining, as the former MMA fighter discusses some really interesting topics. When he was sharing his choice for the scariest fighter in UFC history, we honestly thought he'd name someone like Brock Lesnar, Chuck Liddell, or Fedor Emelianenko. All of these guys were freaks of nature, and we've literally seen their opponents have second thoughts about fighting them. But if there's anyone who ticks all of the boxes and has pretty much everything to go down as the scariest UFC fighter in the history of the game, it has to be Cain Velasquez. The American Gangster thinks Cardio Cain will go down in the history books for being the most intimidating and feared fighter at the promotion. His fighting days are long over, but now that we look back at his career in retrospect, Velasquez was way ahead of his time. The two-time heavyweight champion had it all. He had the size, power, stamina, and conditioning to make him a monster in the division. He might not have a perfect career like the Eagle or something, but don't be mistaken. His progression in the world of MMA is nothing less than extraordinary. He had knockouts, championships, a solid collegiate resume, and a terrifying reputation for being a straight-up killer inside the cage. And in case you're having doubts about him being the scariest fighter in history, name another hard-hitting heavyweight with his level of conditioning, having the ability to fight round after round non-stop. Plus, if that wasn't enough, he's pretty much an industry pioneer in the heavyweight division of MMA. Next, but what about the Cameroonian giant? We know what you're thinking right now. How is he the scariest fighter ever when a monster like Francis Ngannou openly dominates the division? And considering how Ngannou has knocked Cain out in just 26 seconds, doesn't that mean he's been conquered by a scarier, deadlier fighter? Well, Sonnen thinks that debate is going to go on forever. And while Ngannou fans will always argue about the knockout, this isn't a discussion about who's more powerful or effective. It's about who's the scariest. And don't get us wrong here. We think Francis is one of the baddest men on the planet right now, but he's nowhere near Cain. He has the power, the knockouts, and the reputation, but what are some things he doesn't have? Simple. He doesn't have the look, the jawline, the stoicness, the rumors. He doesn't have that killer aura when he steps inside the cage, because after the lights shut off and it's time to take off the gloves, the Cameroonian giant is a soft-spoken gentleman. Not Velasquez, though, and we're sure pissing off Ngannou outside the ring would mean lights out, but there's just something else about Cain. Seeing him walking down the street would make us cross the road and use the other side, because the last thing you want to do is get in his way. We're not talking about who the best is, or who the most effective, or who has the most beautiful resume. Scary, it's a unique word. We weren't on board with the idea of Francis not being the scariest, but after what Sonnen had to say, we totally agree with him. Moving on, asked to do 1,000 kicks. The American Gangster even shared this story of Velasquez and his first interaction with coach Javier Mendez. Now, Mendez isn't your everyday coach, guys. He's trained some of the all-time greats like Daniel Cormier, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and BJ Penn. Rumor has it that Javier was training his fighters in the gym when Cain walked up to him and tried to get his attention. The coach wanted to talk to him, but at the same time, he didn't want to ignore his fighters. And since the former two-time heavyweight champion kept trying to talk to him, Mendez thought it would be easier to just get him started. He didn't tell him to hop on the treadmill and do an hour of jogging or something. No, sir. He told the 40-year-old to go do 1,000 kicks. Considering how intimidating Cain was, he probably thought it was a joke and Javier was just trying to get him off his back. But to everyone's surprise, Velasquez just walks over to the punching bag and starts kicking away to meet the target. We dare you to name another fighter who'd actually take what Mendez said seriously and start kicking. It's just one of those stories that gives you an idea of his work ethic and how committed he was to being the best. Cain was a dominant force throughout his career, with 3 Knockouts of the Night awards to his name, along with the second most knockouts in the heavyweight division. The former MMA superstar is facing 10 charges right now, including one for attempted murder. Now for $1 million bail. Believe it or not, the ex-UFC fighter actually spent an odd 250 days behind bars after shooting a pickup truck carrying Henry Goularte. And in case you haven't heard about this story yet, this might be a little hard to digest. Cain claims Harry sexually abused his 4-year-old son, and that's why he chased him and tried to take matters into his own hands. Look guys, we're not judges or legal experts, but imagine how he'd be feeling after hearing about what his son had to go through. He was finally released on a bail of $1 million, has to wear a GPS monitor, and get this, the judge even advised him to take treatment for a possible degenerative brain disease caused by repeated blows to the thinker. And while Velasquez has never been diagnosed with CTE, his lawyers mentioned how a scan during custody revealed he might have a traumatic brain injury. But all that is beside the point. For starters, we have no idea why his bail was set at $1 million. You have stone-cold killers walking around on a bail way less than that, and the fact that he was locked behind bars for almost 8 months is kind of sad. bad. And like we said before, we're no legal experts claiming he's not guilty, but it's just terrible to see a UFC legend go through so much pain. Cain is expected to appear before a court sometime in the future as he faces 10 charges, including one for attempted murder. Following up, fighters don't need to be heavyweight to be scary. There's this weird notion of how only a heavyweight fighter can be the baddest man on the planet, and if we had to guess, it's probably because of their size. But not all fighters are created equally, and if we're talking about some of the most intimidating MMA fighters of all time, Tony Ferguson is at the top of that list. The cauliflower ears, insane striking ability, and just crazy endurance make him one of the deadliest to step foot inside the cage. And don't even get us started about his elbows, or should we call them hellbows. He's notorious for slicing his opponents with some of the most accurate elbow strikes we've ever seen, and there's yet to be an instance when El Cucuy shows real signs of fear, whether that's inside or outside the cage. We're not sure if you've heard that recording of his wife when she phones 911 to tell them about a dangerous situation involving her husband. She tells the operator to not send too many men because she doesn't want them to get hurt. The operator isn't exactly alarmed, but just a bit confused why Tony's wife is saying she doesn't want anyone to get hurt. When she asks for the name, the missus nervously tells her, "My husband is Tony Ferguson, a professional fighter." Now that's scary. A lot of newer fight fans don't really know what Ferguson has done for the game, and that's mainly because he's sort of fallen off the pedestal. But if you've been following the sport since its early days, El Cucuy was one of the most intimidating fighters out there. Up next, time to get hammered. The UFC has seen its fair share of intimidating fighters, and if we started naming them all, the list would just go on and on. Khabib Nurmagomedov, Georges St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, Chuck Liddell. It's endless. But since this is a video about the most intimidating fighters of all time, how can we forget to include the huge Brock Lesnar? And we don't mean huge as in size, we mean huge in terms of his status inside and outside the octagon. Brock was a beast during his MMA days, as he was an expert at utilizing his amateur wrestling skills to corner his opponents and wreck them with a fury of hammer fists. It was nasty to watch, and don't even get us started about his aura and attitude during weigh-ins. Lesnar was unfazed. No matter who he was fighting, he would stare his opponent down with absolute terror, forcing them to flinch or lose the match before it even started. But the number one thing that made him terrifying was his temper. You did not want to piss this man off. He hasn't ever completely lost control inside the octagon, but you could literally feel the energy shift when he lost his cool. He'd go nuts trying to take his opponents down and smack their heads open with his signature hammer fists, a true freak of nature. Last but not least, an honorable mention. Before signing off, we think it'd be pretty unfair if we didn't name this fighter as one of the scariest of all time. It's none other than Jon Jones, ladies and gentlemen. With an impressive record of 28 wins at just one loss, former light heavyweight champion Jon Jones is the honorable mention of this video. You really don't want to end up on his bad side. That's it from our side, folks. So what do you think? Is Cain Velasquez the scariest UFC fighter of all time? Let us know in the comments below. Remember, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more interesting content in the future. Bye now.